The user puts it into a spreadsheet, even if they have to rekey it. They put it into a spreadsheet. They combine it with something else. They pass it on to somebody else. 7.4 generations. Okay, now look at the power we've created to get massive amounts of data out there and propagate it through businesses. So we have some real issues, some things that we have to step up to in self-service BI that are not all going to be resolved by the technology. At the same time, we have some benefits to be derived from self-service BI. That local line of business control is a good thing. Who better knows the questions to be answered, the information that is needed, the urgency to get that information than the people on the front lines? And jumping through hoops, IT organizations and projects to get answers 30 days from now that you needed yesterday just isn't satisfactory. So self-service steps up to that. Self-service allows for some autonomy and some personalization and some realization that data isn't just something we store and process and report on. Data is like the lifeblood of an organization. It flows through business processes and nourishes those business processes in much the same way that blood flows through your body and nourishes every cell in the body. Data is what makes businesses work. So freeing up this data is a good thing. We just have to figure out how to make all of these self-service BI issues work themselves out, which is much of what this panel is going to help us to understand from their experiences. We can accelerate the speed of analysis. We can increase the capacity for analysis, for getting value from data, for getting insights from data. We can increase that capacity tremendously if it stops being closely held by elite groups of IT people and data scientists and statisticians, and everybody can analyze data. We increase our capacity for analysis tremendously. That's like growing our own intelligence. This is kind of like putting the intelligence back in business intelligence. So it's all a good thing, and it does help to unburden IT from the onslaught of analysis and reporting requests. So we can go in good places. We can do good things, but we have to be attentive to the fact that the end-to-end doesn't start and end with technology. It begins and ends with people, and we're going to have to address those people issues too. So with that, I want to get us started on the panel discussion. We will direct some questions directly to the panels that we've already collected some questions of interest. And we'll go through panel discussion of those questions. If during that time of discussing those questions you need clarification, don't hesitate to ask for it. But if you have new questions, please hold those after we've finished with the prepared questions for the panel. We'll open the floor up, and anybody is welcome to bring their questions up and direct them to any panel member or to the panel as a whole for anyone to choose to answer. So with that, I want to start by asking all of our panelists, what is self-service BI?
You want to kick us off?
Sure.
Yeah, so I'll keep it, I think, short and sweet. So Bill Gates at one point had a mission for for the company, which is a computer on every desk and in every home. I think similarly with self-service BI, I see a world where I want every analyst, every company, every end user to have reporting tools that are inexpensive and efficient. And just to share a little story around that, it's the more I've worked with this, for a long time I was just a report user, a report developer, and like I built reports and it was whatever. I didn't really think much of it. It was just a job. And by the time I got into teaching and training and talking to people, interacting with them, and realizing like these tools that I'm teaching can literally, the data changes lives, and it improves in such a way that you can teach a person how to do something in an hour that used to take 10, and their lives are better for it. And I think that's a lot of where self-service BI is going, is it's teaching the world, the analyst world, to fish, where they didn't even realize that a rod existed to do that with. So to me, that's what I think of when I think of self-service BI, is putting those tools in all of these hands for people who never even knew those types of things existed, and being able to just experience with them the joy that comes out of, oh my god, like this thing exists and I can do that for myself and for my company. Like this is amazing, and and just all the things that come with that. So that's self-service BI for me.
Cool. I'm gonna go a little bit different track. When I think about self-service BI, I think about two things. I think about a culture, as Dave mentioned, and a physical infrastructure. And when those two things come together, in a true self-service world, you have an organization, a group of people that are empowered to discover and ask questions in a way that they're comfortable with. Because some people want to write Python, and some people want to write SQL. Some people want to write Fortran. Some people just want to hook up a tool and have it let them interact with their data how they want to. And a true self-service organization shouldn't hinder that. At the same time, it should allow them to get access and discover data that is relevant to their questions. So that notion of discovery, the ability to do it yourself without having to pick up the phone and play phone tag or look through some archaic Dewey Decimal System. But I think the last piece is that it also empowers people to collaborate, ask questions of each other, and to be wrong. Because we're going to do analysis on data that is fresh and some that is old and some that is large and some that is small, and you're not going to be right. You'll be partially right, but the point isn't to be right. The point is to make a decision, right? It's, you're going to take the best data that you have and the best people that you have and the best technology that you have, which, by the way, should be transparent to that process. It should just be there to enable you. And then you're going to do an analysis, make a decision, and move on. That's the point. It should facilitate that process and all of the pieces and parts that are required for that process. The tools don't matter. The technology doesn't matter other than the fact that it should exist and enable you. So part of it comes back to what do we build and how do we build it, but a lot of it comes back to the people and the type of culture that we have that allows those people to be to engage with data and ask it questions.
Yeah. I want to stand up for this because I get excited about this stuff. So I had a bottom-up view of this for most of my life, which is, I must say, not a very flattering view. So I was on the front line, as Dave said, and working in one or the other business team for the most part, sales, marketing, finance, operations, and everywhere it was the same story. It was me kind of working in the data dungeon, kind of cranking the wheel, and there were these folks who lived up in the ivory tower and who had all the data, and I would go with a begging bowl like, hey, can I have some? Or come back in 3 months. And I wouldn't get it. So that was self-service BI for me, and it was not fun, at least not in that world. My reports, my spreadsheets were like a ball and chain around my neck, and I was just married to it. So when I teach my class, I talk to my students and I talk about 5 signs you're living in data hell. One of them is you can't schedule your vacation. You have to schedule your vacation around the report refresh days. Like, oh, no. That whole week is gone and done for. I'm stuck refreshing a report. That was my life, but that changed when I discovered Power BI. So we talked about this. It's not really about the tool. It's just about what these tools enable you to do. And only when I found these tools, I felt like I was that ostrich who had suddenly, I had stuck my neck out and like, wow, I don't have to spend my time just chained to my spreadsheets. Now I can truly do my job. And that was the worst part. I was a business analyst. My job was to make the company more money, to save them where I could. But I was just being a data jockey. And now, when I was freed from that data drudgery, could I really focus on my job? So for me, self-service BI is that journey from data drudgery to data joy.
So for me, it's about 3 basic things. It's about simplicity. People don't want to be bogged down trying to figure out how to use the analytics tool. They want it to be very simple and direct, and you get right into it. They want it to be reliable. They want it to be accurate every day, every time. They shouldn't have to wait. They shouldn't have to worry if that data is correct or not correct. And it should be scalable so that whatever comes down the pike to your company, you go from 100 users to 1,000 users, 1,000 to 10,000. It should be scalable, and nobody should ever notice that anything has changed because their experience should be the same. It should always be good.
Right, I thought Tony and Chris both made some good points about people. People want it to be simple. Some people like to write Python. Some people like to write SQL. So self-service BI really should be something that has a perspective of recognizing diversity of people and diversity of people's preferences and being accessible to all of them. But I think we also have to remember that not everybody wants self-service. Some people want you to cook the meal for them. They don't want you to send them to the kitchen to work it out for themselves, no matter how fancy the tools. So we're never going to get 100% self-service penetration. That shouldn't be our goal. Self-service should be for people who want to serve themselves in the way that they want to serve themselves. So the human piece is a big part of it. Let me ask you, Avi, what kinds of cultural changes do you think are required for self-service BI to succeed?
So I talked about, for most of my life, I saw the world as IT versus business. And I saw this conflict, I saw this friction. And as a business user, things were always changing, and there was a bias for action. And at least from my perspective, IT seemed like that ivory tower with a bias for inaction. Now, of course, once I discovered self-service BI, I was like, okay, see ya, suckers. I mean, sayonara, I'm on my own. But pretty quickly, once you walk on that path, that you realize that it's not really about IT versus business. Self-service BI is not about putting IT out of business. In fact, if anything, IT is more important than ever. But I do believe that the role has to slightly change. At least the organizations that I worked in, I feel that the IT, the role they were playing, was they were giving people rights. Like, okay, you need to go from this street to that street, which typically equated to insane things like, oh, I need to change this column chart to bar chart. And that becomes a change request which gets logged and gets done maybe in 3 months. That was just ridiculous. So I think that role needs to change so that they are focused more on building roads instead of giving rights. So they're focused more on building that infrastructure and enabling those users who can then, hey, I can call my own Uber. I'm okay with that. I got Power BI, but enable me and give me that infrastructure. So I realized that their role is even more critical. But I do believe that they need to put business first, and I think business has kind of disappeared, and I think it's time to put the business back in business intelligence. Thoughts?
Would be kind of cool if we had both business and intelligence in BI. Anybody want to follow up on that?
I've got one thought, and this is so we all got together. We didn't rehearse the answers to this, but we all got together last week, 2 weeks ago, whatever. And just kind of got to know each other and each other's perspectives. And in that conversation, we kind of stumbled onto something. So if we assume that IT or your data warehouse team or your data engineers build you this wonderful infrastructure, and there's data coming in all over the place, and you can find it. I think the other cultural piece that we have to recognize is that, to Dave's point, that some people want you to do it for them, is that one, we have to guard against our time, right? Because we can go down rabbit holes and rat holes, and we can have, run into paralysis of analysis. But we can also have the people who interpret self-service BI as, oh, this is just how I ask my analysts more questions faster, right? So I think, the cultural shift is like, no. You are responsible for your own things. If we put the business back in it, it's your business. You take care of your business until you can't. You have to learn how to ask your questions and find the people who can, and the services that can help you. And I think the other part about it is that we all have to be okay with a little more uncertainty. Because the businesses we all engage in now fundamentally go back to people. We can't know 100% of things when we make decisions. So we have to be okay making the best decision and being okay with being wrong and knowing that the analysis that we and our teammates did backed up that decision. It's one thing to go through this process and have these reports and these analysis, and you throw it at the wall and say, we throw it away, and then we do something different. You can't justify that decision. You sit in an Amazon WBR, you're going to get roasted. It's just going to happen. But if you say, you know what? The numbers were this, the trends were that, the trailing 30 was this, the metrics were whatever, I wouldn't have done anything different. But we have to embrace that uncertainty and the fact that if we're going to want self-service, that we have to actually be agents of that change and agents of that action.
Be the change that you seek.
I guess.
So Avi, you had to kind of focused on the B for business in BI. I'll kind of roll with that, but also, I'm going to focus on the self part of self-service. So it's, you talked about the relationship between IT and the developer. The idea that it doesn't have to be a battle between, but a collaboration with. So my same thing with self-service BI is especially with changing the culture, is the same thing for the end user. I'll keep it closer. The historical tradition has been, you build a report, you deploy it to somebody. It's a static report. They want a variation of it. They email you back. They ask for a different version. And I think a lot of people still have that same mindset. So it's not only working together with IT with the relationship, it's working together with the customers, the clients, and helping them understand that you're not just getting, regardless of the tool that you use, really any modern visualization tool these days is 1,000 reports in one. It's 100,000 reports in one. So it's the education and the fact that, hey, you can ask a question, it's going to take me 24 to 48 hours to answer that. How about instead I show you how to answer your own question in a second using the report tools that you have. So I think a lot of the shifting needs to come on that level too, to teach them that they have the tools that they need to also just ask their own questions and do their own analysis using whatever BI has been given to them at that very other end of the spectrum.
So some good observations there. I think ultimately what it comes down to is cultural shift, is that we can't get rid of the central services. We'll continue to need the central services, but we need to rethink them to make self-service work. And the best example I've seen, I had the privilege of working with Chris Weiss at Columbia Sportswear down in Portland as he was driving Columbia towards self-service culture. And he made a really strong statement when he totally reorganized and renamed their BICC. It's no longer the BI Competency Center, it's the BI Competency Community. It is staffed differently, and their goals are communication, collaboration, and coaching. I think that's the kind of cultural shift that it takes to really get us there. And I think all of you guys alluded to that in your comments on cultural shift. Chris, what role should metadata play in self-service BI?
I think it has actually a really large role to play in that metadata allows you to accomplish a couple of very core components to self-service. I think the first one is discoverability, right? We don't know, and I need to be able to find stuff. Like, I need to know what revenue tables are. I need to know where the people tables are. I need to know where's my traffic data. And not everyone knows how to use information schema, or that information schema actually exists, or may even have permission to look at information schema. And even if you did, would you even want to look at it? So I think part of it is just enabling people to go look. Like people use Wikipedia all the time. They go spearfishing, they type something in, and ta-da, here you go. So I think that's the first part, is because if you can't find something, then you're going to revert back to whatever's sitting in yours or your fellow coworker's Dropbox. So I think finding and vetting and having the data around the data that says this is what it is, this is what's in it, this is who owned it, this is if it's valid or not, and whether or not it's protected or certified or whatever. I think the second piece is to help avoid redundancy, because I observed this at Zillow. We had many tables that if you matched their schemas up, they were within 1 to 2 columns of each other, but those 1 to 2 columns were all different. So there's like core 25, and then there's a bunch of drift. So 1, people are wasting time and being redundant, and 2, we're having to pay for that processing time, right? I get rid of 25 jobs, maybe I free up some cycles and something else processes faster. So I think it helping to know kind of what the state of affairs is and what is available to you and what's in it will just ultimately help you ease your frustration, get to your answers quicker, but also know who to talk to. Because if I know that the tables that I'm looking at don't have what I need, but I know who created them, I can guarantee you I'm going to get out of my desk and I'm going to walk over there. I'm going to say, I'm going to talk to you for 10 minutes. Tell me, how do I get this other thing? So I think it actually can facilitate collaboration as well. But that's all great. But I think the final part is recognizing and building trust. So I connect to data. Where did that data come from? Are there other tables that are related to it? What's the source of this data? When was it last updated? Because there's nothing that will kill an analysis or a meeting faster in that you show it to somebody and the data that you're showing them, like, nope, I don't think that's right, and you can't prove it. Like, it could be the most impactful decision ever. But if for whatever reason that they think you're off by 1/10 of a point because you picked the wrong column and they don't trust the number, or someone has, or worse off, someone else has the same calculation but a different number, now the meeting is about the difference and not the data. So I think when you wrap all those things together, you can't have a real self-service organization without some sort of metadata.
Cool. Any follow-up?
So being in business, you often get used to being treated like the mushroom, kept in dark and fed. And it was kind of an odd thing. So I met with an IT person, and they would show off a report as if like this is the ultimate report. And it was 256 columns, and he's like, yeah. And I'm like, why would you build a report like that? I was like, well, that's anything anybody could ever ask for. But of course, that's true, but that 256 column report is completely useless because we know where that goes. Somebody hits export to Excel and then does a lot of data munging. But I like what Dave said. Certainly when it comes to kind of metadata, I didn't really know what that word meant back then. For me, I was in the process of discovering data, discoverability, but for me, it certainly was not what you know, but who you know. It was about finding the right people. It's like, hey, can you hook me up? Can you get me read-only access to the data? I swear I wouldn't touch it. But yeah, I hope things change. I've seen kind of IT resistance where like business users are not savvy enough to do data. But I really hope that it's the versus between IT and business goes away, because there's no versus. They all work for the same company. They have the same goals. And I know that the part that I didn't quite like was IT talking down to me. I hope that changes. And in the same regard, I certainly, once I discovered more and walked further in Power BI journey, I got new regard for the IT teams because I saw the challenges that they deal with it too, with governance and so forth, metadata, things that earlier as a business user, I never ever thought about.
All right, good stuff. Couple of things resonated with me. One was Chris's discussion of redundancy makes me think about the tremendous amount of reusable things that we build when we're working with data and the infrequency with which they're reused. So we have lots and lots and lots of highly similar tables, lots and lots and lots of highly similar data models, and continue to rebuild the same thing over and over again. There is a huge gap between reusable and reused. And it's metadata that's going to help us bridge that gap. So I think that's an important aspect of what metadata does for us and why metadata is so important to this whole self-service equation. Let me hand a question to you, Reed. What can we do to improve the success and the adoption rate of self-service BI?
So, a lot of, yes, you already mentioned, Dave, and you pointed out with this, is the idea that a lot of the issues that have been with the first wave of self-service BI is the fact that, hey, we have data, Now we have the reporting tools, and now we have the data wrangling and the data cleanup tools for all this. But what that lets us end up with is the fact that we now have 1,000 versions of the truth. We have as many models with as many reports and as many ways to build them, all with little things that can cause deltas with the data, things where like the discussion is no longer around what is our data telling us. Now it's like, why are your numbers different than mine? Why are we all doing these different things? And up until recently, we've not had technology to really, do much with that. We've had to download the data and do our own thing. Ideally, as I've spoken to a little bit, the relationship between Central and the report developer, it's been something where a lot of people have thought it's been a butting of heads, not a relationship. And I think that's where the wave needs to go to create further success. It's not simply everybody having their own reports and completely ignoring IT. It's not having IT holding the key to the kingdom and having just the information there where you have to go to them and ask, like, can you add this thing? All right, well, that's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. It's going to take a lot of time. Why, it needs to be somewhere between the two, where the tools that you're using, you have a way to have that central data source. You're working with IT, you get most of the information that you need to from it, where it has the metadata, it has all the information, it has agreed upon metrics. But the goal with this is for that 5%, those little things that you need that you have to do yourself, you can still be able to do that. Somehow utilize central data sources, but also still add your own ad hoc little things, but still work with IT and like, hey, I'm putting these things in, let's have a discussion about this. Is this something that could add value that I can push back to Central? And like, sure, we can do that. It's going to be a little while. Like, okay, cool. I still have the tools that I can deploy that for my reporting for now. And once that implementation has happened, it can switch. So it's that relationship between the two to be able to still do the self-service BI, the reporting that you need, but not necessarily having to wait for all of that. And I think the tools are getting to that point today where you can have that kind of relationship between both of them without having to pick, do I use central source or do I use my own completely ad hoc stuff? And it's the evolution towards this is finally, I think, at that point where that second wave is happening and people are realizing that a combination of these two prevents that death by 1,000 cuts where you end up with too many versions of the same truth.
So I got to follow up with a question.
Sure.
So do you think the massive volume of data that we have, number of choices for data, is...
I think that's partially what kind of addresses it is working and being able to have centralized sources, even if they don't exist to help develop them, reduces the need to have to connect to 55 sources to connect for those things, and then figuring out, wait, well, is this the right source? Well, there's 8 versions of this. I have a large company that I've done some reporting for, to be unnamed, where I went in and realized that, as the panelists have mentioned, 8 versions of the same model that has 1 or 2 column differences, and everybody's doing their own same thing, and they're all connecting to the same source, or 2 of them are connecting to a few other ones, and it's a nightmare of data. And really, like, without any kind of central thing to at least agree upon, nobody's really gonna, you're repeating so much work and so much time, and it's so cost intensive for the companies to do this.
So too many choices then is really an inhibitor.
It is. I mean, who here is watching Netflix at some point, right? Who has ever experienced choice paralysis with watching Netflix? You spend an hour trying to figure out what the hell to watch because there's just too many options. There's a great psychology study that's pretty tried and true. If you're given an option between 3 things, you're going to be really certain you've made the right choice when you pick one of those 3. If you're given an option between 50 things, there's a good chance you're going to be much more uncertain that you picked that, and you're going to have regrets later on, more than likely. Too many options eventually reduces confidence, and it leads to a lot of ambiguity, especially around data.
Follow-up comments from any of the panel? All right, Tony. One of the things we know is the self-service BI isn't cheap. The tools cost us money, the deployment costs us money, the support costs us money. How do we measure the value and the ROI of self-service?
That's a great question. I think there are a couple of different ways to look at this. For one, I was thinking about this over the last week or two. There's actually a really big piece that I call emotional ROI. When I joined Amazon, I joined Global IT. Global IT is made up of 1,300 people who are basically all some type of engineer, some type of really high-end IT guy. So we're not catering to many of the same people that a typical business is catering to when we're talking about people in finance or marketing and so on. We're talking to people who say, no, I'm going to write that script myself and figure it all out and grab that data. The problem is you get into as everybody has said here tonight at least once, you're getting into the point where you walk into a BR, or WBR, right, Chris? And you get absolutely trashed because your number doesn't match his number, doesn't match his number. And that is just not going to work. So the emotional part of it is building that trust. The return on investment in an environment like I'm in now, where we're not quite at that maturity level for self-service analytics in the way that I think we're just talking about it here tonight, is that the boss needs to know that he can trust the investment that's being made in this greenfield environment that we're now calling BI for global IT. So there's a big emotional component to it. Now, getting back to the normal ROI questions, of course you have major system ROI, which is really simple. You know, how is this thing going to pay for itself, and how is it going to pay for itself? A lot of people talk about ROI like, is it going to actually generate revenue? Our group doesn't think about it that way. Our group thinks about being at a company that's growing 25% year over year in headcount. We have 400,000 laptops and desktops that we support. We have 10,000 conference rooms now. All these things are at scale that are hard to imagine. And the amount of data that comes in is really hard to imagine. But we have really huge goals as far as cost cutting and return on investment. And the goal is we want to reduce tickets. For us, everything's about trouble tickets. How do we reduce tickets every year by 10%? Well, it's impossible when your company is growing by 25% per year, because you have that many more people doing that much more stuff, and it's nearly impossible to do that. What you can do, though, is you can find ways to build these tools. I don't even know if self-service, not in the sense that you're talking about it, where people are out there building, but people are consuming. Because what we don't want is we don't want these 1,400 engineers wasting their time trying to build data extracts and build visualizations, when their time should be spent finding a new way to scale a phone system so that it can handle 1 million users every day, or finding a new way to increase the speed of the network, or something like that. That's their job. Their job is not to go out there and get data and crunch numbers. They have to trust us, and we have to, we have to be able to provide that. So the big thing for us with like help desk and so on is how do you have this kind of growth and be able to pay for it in headcount models. So variable headcount models, really big deal for us. And how does this system that we can identify problems and show people these problems and find ways to use the metrics to identify problems and solve them, so that we don't have to keep hiring people to go after the same issues time and time again. So I think for us, a lot of it really revolves around how do you kind of stem the tide of this constant growth. We have to hire, we have to hire, we have to hire because I have these problems. No, the analytics, the metrics should identify these things and help us solve them, so that we're not constantly in that chasing, spinning cycle.
Follow up, guys?
I would still like to add something. So I think the question of ROI, it's kind of very top down, and I'll say that I don't have much respect for that approach, because typically I saw some decision made somewhere up in the corner office, and maybe they watched a fancy sales deck and they were blown away, and the word came down that thou shall use this BI tool. And of course, for folks on the front line, it hardly ever made any sense. Like, those tools came and went, and you trusted your handy Excel. But when it comes to the front line, I believe the new tools, and Tableau, Power BI, they're all part of the same wave. The question of ROI is again moot, because as Reed was talking about, so we both, Reed and I, are in training. When we train people and we show them something and we see their eyes light up and they realize that, oh, they can save like 20 hours in a week. So the question of ROI doesn't make sense, because it's night and day. You're not doing that. And I like the word you use, is more of an emotional ROI, because I know that how much more joy they're going to get out of their jobs now that the drudgery the data drudgery has been removed from that. So that's kind of my take on it, on ROI.
Other comments?
So what you're seeing here is actually the end of a conversation that started at dinner 2 weeks ago. This ROI question took up a lot of our conversation, and I know that questions from the audience are coming up, so I'll be intentionally controversial and say that when it comes to ROI, you just don't measure it, right? You just don't. Don't bother. Sorry, Slalom. It's because it's for the reasons that Tony and Avi mentioned, is that what these tools come down to is solving a problem. And sure, you can sick a graduate student or an MBA on what's the avoided financial cost or the opportunity cost of not having to do X, but they're going to be wrong, because if you're successful, you've now enabled people to do more things and generate more activity. So, like, you know, it's one thing, you know, versus the other, and they may be spending more time in the tool or doing that type of analysis, but they're doing 10 things instead of one thing. I think when we talk about ROI, the question, it should come down to two things. One, are you solving problems that you have documented? I have a system, I have a people problem, I have a systems problem, and are these tools checking those boxes? If you can't point to that, then don't buy the tool. Don't use the tool, right? Because if you're not solving a problem, I mean, then you're just giving away money. And if you are, then I'd like some. The second piece goes back to, you know, this whole conversation of culture, is that, and Tony put this perfectly, these people are hired to do a job. And some people are hired to do analysis, but that analysis is meant to serve a decision or enable a decision or generate new business. But a lot of times that's not people's jobs. They're hired to engineer things. They're hired to help people. And so the more hours that they spend doing data drudgery is not hours that they are spent in the thing that they were hired and trained to do. And one, that's an entirely dissatisfying life to live. And two, you're wasting money on those people because they're not, you recruited them to do a job and you're not helping them do that job. So if the ROI comes from, are you checking the boxes, and are the people that you hired doing the job that they are hired for? And if you can say yes to both of those things, then buy that tool and buy it now. But then don't be afraid to kick it out when something else comes and does that job better, or bring in something else. Because it isn't about money, it's about time, and it's about people, and it's about outcome.
Okay, a couple of nuggets out of that conversation. One was, if I were to summarize a lot of Tony's comments, it sort of comes down to figure out what your impact metrics are, whether it's stopping the hiring churn or whatever. Figure out what your impact metrics are and measure the value based on that. And then Chris's comment on just don't measure ROI makes me think every ROI calculation I have ever seen related to BI, every ROI calculation I have ever done related to BI is a creative work of fiction. Slam dunk it into a spreadsheet, somebody will believe it because it's in Excel, put it behind you and move on. All right, so let's take your questions.
Sorry, guys.
The only bad question is the one not asked.
What about, like, so we kind of know the state of affairs as far as current tools and offerings in competition, Power BI, Tableau. Like 5-10 years from now, like, where's the compete space going to be for, like, BI products?
5 or 10 years from now, where's the compete space going to be for BI products? I think it's going to be in smart application of smart technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive intelligence, and some of it's going to be not so much in the analysis and reporting end, but in the data management end. I work as an analyst with Eckerson Group, and we did some 2018 predictions, and one of the predictions I put out there was that vendors will start exploring the concept of self-driving data from point of ingestion. It knows where it's supposed to land and how to get there. I made that prediction, I think, the third week of December, and I had a briefing with one software vendor just last week who they didn't use the term self-driving data, but that's what they're talking about when they talk about automating data pipelines with machine learning and intelligence. So that's my take. Guys?
Well, I don't have the crystal ball, but one thing that I am passionate about is so I'm a business user, and it's kind of a bit of an IT speak, so I sometimes find myself the odd one out in the business community, but I'm really passionate about disconnecting the model from the visualization tool. I always talk about that, and a lot of business users are like, what? Because they're still in that Excel mindset, and I feel it's kind of a tragedy. A lot of people move from that XLSX world to PBIX world. They swap one for the other, and I don't think they're making that leap. That big leap, I believe, comes from when you disconnect the model, and in my Power BI world, that is talking about the query editor, how you clean, shape, transform data, bring it in the model, define your formulas, define your measures. But then I want to live in a world where you're free to choose your own visualization tool, and you can do that right now. So you can build a model. I would build it using Power BI, but you could use any other tool. And then you use Power BI reports, you use Excel reports, you use Tableau. All of those you're free to choose. So I do see the world that, you know how kind of this was not a BYOB event, but a lot of companies went to BYOD, bring your own device. Earlier, they used to hand out BlackBerries to people. Now that's a thing of past, right? You bring in your phone and it works with the system. I think it's going to be a world of bring your own visualization tool. I mean, I've heard these stories like, oh yeah, we're trying to use Power BI, but we're officially a ClickView shop or something like that. That's just ridiculous, right? So separate the model, use the tools you need to use to build those models, but then have your analysts, have your business users have a choice of visualization tool that they love using. Gosh, that's my voice.
I think we're starting to see some of this now, and I think what we'll see in 5 to 10 years is a combination of more plug-and-play services. So for those of you who follow MicroStrategy, they announced at their user conference last week, that one of the core components of that platform, which is a data modeling service, is now openly accessible as a Tableau data source. So they know the things that they're good at, and that they know that some people, like the companies that have a large investment in them, may also have a large investment in other tools, and they don't want to block each other. So I think what we'll start to see is a combination of these large platforms branching out into the different pieces and parts of the data space. So the initial ETL phase, the modeling phase, the prep phase, the visualization phase, and then through whether it's open standards or some sort of agreed upon internal standard, be able to say, I want to use SSIS for my ETL phase, but I want to allow my users to use Project Maestro because that's how people want to work for active data prep, but we want to do everything in Chartio, and all those things will play nicely together. I think that's kind of where the direction is going to be. Things will become more building block. And it'll take a while, but I think that things will all play nicely together because everyone will realize that there's more money to be made by playing together.
Yeah, and I think when I look back 30 years of doing this, it's probably 80% of what I've ever worked with doesn't exist anymore. And probably 80% of what I will continue to work with hasn't been invented yet. So it really doesn't matter. Whatever tool works at the time, you go with it.
So to that note, I kind of agree with the idea that overall open sourcing and just exposing these these tools out to the world and letting them connect with things, letting things connect to them. Like the interplay between this is definitely the wave that I've seen those go. I fully agree to that. I also think that a lot of these tools are headed in the direction where we're needing to write less and less code for these things, which is amazing. Starting back in Excel 2010, you had to write the code to do your formulas. You had to write almost everything was handwritten. Very few things were user interface. And every year, more and more tools across the board, whether or not it's software that now can literally build tabular models for you with mouse clicks, software that can do the data shaping for you with mouse clicks, software that can write calculations and formulas through you, again, with mouse clicks. And I think we're getting to the point where, yes, we're going to need expertise. We're going to need people to know what to do and best practices to implement it with. But I think it's going to get further and further away from needing to write the physical code ourselves and more toward the tools that are capable enough to do 90% of what we need to do. Like, sure, we can go in and write it ourselves if we need to for some niche scenarios, but I've loved watching that, because then that means that not only the experts like us who've spent years maybe going through and learning that those code sets, it becomes more and more easier for the average self-service BI person or anybody else to enter this world and be able to do amazing things without having to spend 2 years and get a certification. So I'm loving where that's going, and I think that's going to do some amazing stuff in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think it's going to get even more amazing than that. Think about the possibilities when you blend voice technologies with BI. Wouldn't it be cool as a business manager to be sitting there at your desk and say, Alexa, why are revenues up but margins down?
We're working on that already.
Hi, Per Sali with Paralysis. I want to go back to the ROI question again, because I think it's really, really important to think about it. I agree with you guys that it might be a moot issue to try to measure what's the quality of data worth right here, right now. However, if I'm a board member or the CEO of the company, I do want to know that my BIT, my IT professionals are trying to help me succeed with the strategy and the overall objectives of the company. So can we measure success by how we are succeeding with enabling our salespeople, operational managers, and inventory people and people in the field with increasing customer success, the sales increases and everything else, that those are the overall plans and objectives of the companies. Is there a way for us as BI professionals to kind of adhere to these global goals that our company has set? And any thoughts on that?
I think there's a couple of things you can do. One is if through the metadata you can identify which business units are most active in using self-service capabilities and frequently using data to help them make decisions, and you can correlate active use of BI with improved performance on their scorecards and their KPIs, that's going to tell a story. The other thing I think is, if we step back from ROI and think ROA, data is a huge asset. We invest a lot in managing and maintaining that huge data asset. If we see increased frequency of use of that data asset and we can quantify that and say we're getting 10% or 15% or 20% gain in return on asset, and approach it as an ROA model instead of an ROI model, I think we're telling a big dollar story.
I think a way to add on to that is think about it like any other application, right? You open up Facebook, and Facebook knows how many people are actively using the tool on any given day. So I think if you start by, at one point we had 10 developers with averaging 100 queries a day at 1 terabyte of data processed, and we bring in these additional data sets and these additional tools, and now we have 100 people querying 1,000 times a petabyte a day. I think it's an easy story to tell that utilization is a factor of people are going to use tools they don't want to use. And the fact that those tools are connected to this investment that you've made means that you're making the right investments. Now, they could just be running the same query over and over and over again. But I think behavior tracking behavior and tracking output is the simplest way to do it. I think it's not like a it's not like a, I forget the right terminology, but you do the assessment as post hoc and you evaluate it every year, right? At Zillow we did, how many reports did we build this year? How many reports did we build last year? What was the average number of people who consumed a report? What was the number of average daily active users on Tableau server? What were the reports that were of the highest usage? And if those numbers are going up, then it's working. Because because people are being asked questions and producing content that people want to know the answers to. Now, whether or not that correlates with the other end of the business, I'd love for you to attribute your $10 million in increased revenue to my BA team, and then you can cut me a commission. But that's not how it works, because you can't know that that's a thing, but you can at least have a signal. So I think doing it in a consistent evaluation and tracking, I bought this thing, I'm going to instrument it, and I'm going to track who's using it, what, where, and why. And if those numbers are going in the direction that you project that they are, then I'd say that it's a valuable investment.
Question from the young lady behind you, Tyler.
So to piggyback on that question a bit about ROI, I heard the use of the term emotional ROI and then joy in terms of user experience, which user experience should be joyful, but to sell that to a team of executives evaluating a technology procurement would be a bit rough. My question is twofold. One, how did you come up with those concepts and then sell them effectively to executive leadership? And then also, along the same vein, if you are, I liked the idea of either it's solving a problem or it's not. It's more Boolean than subjective, I guess is where I'm going with that. So which approach would you really use? Because I know if I went into a room of executives and said, oh, there's an emotional ROI on this and it's going to bring the users a lot of joy, it'd go over like a lead balloon.
So that's a great question. I'm kind of hearing the two aspects of essentially how do you have the soft terms of I don't know if it was me who mentioned the joy part and then the emotional ROI over here, but translate that to something up to the people who sign the checks. And I think and wrapping it back with ROI, I really think it comes back to that drudgery, the death by 1,000 cuts with the things that take 20 hours a week to do. That has a literal one-to-one correlation of if you've sat in a room with 5 people and you've saved each of them 10 hours off of their work week every single week, you've now automatically added so much joy to their lives because now they've reduced the drudgery. They've added time to think and to be able to add value to their company, and you can immediately have them go back to their manager and say, hey, we just spent X number of dollars on whatever services this is. We've just saved 10 hours a week on this work, multiplied by 4 weeks in a month, this much in a year, and you can immediately sell that back to them. So it's kind of a win on both ends. You have the joy delivered at that level, but that translates to time, which translates back to money all the way up to the executives.
As a woman in tech, those terms just seem a little bit soft, and I would find it personally difficult to sell them to C-level executives.
I don't think it wasn't too hard to sell for me in a what I would call a greenfield environment, because exactly what we've been talking about, how much time is saved. We can point in the last 6 months to thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. We can see people sit back at their desk when they're looking at a scatter plot instead of 100,000 rows by 50 columns, and they go, oh, there it is. They see that outlier, and instantly they know why and how. And you see that physical and emotional, relaxation. Okay, problem identified, problem solved. So it does work. I don't think it's actually that hard. I don't think it's that soft, because it makes people really feel good. So.
But I think you have to position it from the perspective of whoever you're trying to pitch it to. So if you work in a balanced scorecard organization, you put it down there in that fourth quadrant of learning and growth and competencies. Through self-service BI, we're increasing the capabilities and the competencies of the entire workforce. When we raise competencies, that improves process excellence. When we improve process excellence, That increases customer satisfaction. When we increase customer satisfaction, the end result is increased profit. So if you can cast it in that balanced scorecard context, then I think it becomes less of a soft thing and more of a tangible.
I'll just add really quick. I don't typically sell to the chief level, but usually any conversation that I have, I usually encourage people to just go build something. And I think these tools are so freaking fast that that duration can be a week. So I was at a client and we were at like a 3-day long hours building a solution, and 2 days was a lot of kind of understanding the data and building it up. On the 3rd day, we finally started presenting, and the folks there would start clapping, and I would get red in the face, like, why are they clapping? I later heard the story that what we had built in 3 days, they had been trying to build, well, they had been trying to work with IT for 1 year and it hadn't gone anywhere. So if you can, take the action route and let them just show the value rather than having to debate the finer points of emotional ROI, perhaps.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. The gentleman on the aisle back there has been very patient for quite a while with his hand up.
So I guess my question is, how are you managing when you hit the limit? How are you managing when you hit the limitations of self-service BI? So you go in and you roll out and you have these groups that adopt it and they have infrastructure or data warehouses that support it, and you run into that one group where they run on like a predictive application server or something completely different, and none of the tools really lock onto it. They can't really get into the self-service BI model. How are you managing that when you go into a type of situation? Because there's just certain things it can't hook up to yet.
I call the product team. No, I'm serious. So that's a glib answer. There's 2 ways to approach it. One is there's always a way, right? I have yet to find a data source that doesn't have some sort of endpoint, whether it's a JDBC or an ODBC or a REST API or, heaven forbid, an RPC. Like, it exists, right? And you can take, there's always, most of these tools have some sort of way. You can either connect directly to it through like a generic connector, or you just build one. Like, you build an intermediate server. You build it, like, you write something in Node or write something in Python or whatever you pick your weapon, and you just shove it in there. And then you let that, and it's not going to be like the ideal, but it's going to let them kind of experience it. And then what you do is you take all of that feedback and you hand it to your rep and say, we're not going to renew their licenses unless you fix this. I mean, everyone works on subscription these days. They have to win that back. So you have to remember that you have a lot, whether it's 1 license, 2 licenses, or 1,000, you have agency and leverage with that product. Because not only that, you can go, if they ignore you, then you cut ideas in their forum, or you send customer support requests, or you go on Twitter and say, you know what, we're trying to do this thing and we want to use your tool and you won't let us. And you will be surprised at how responsive they are when you're shaming them on Twitter. And I think, it's not in a negative way. It's saying, look, I got a problem and I really want to use your tool, but there's this thing in the middle, and this kludgy Apache thing is not cutting it for me. If you don't like this, I'm going to take my business to Google. So it is possible, and I think, and so all the way around to that is, hopefully, by implementing these things, you now have some time and some headspace to actually go fix that problem, because you're not solving these other drudgery problems the rest of the time.
It's exactly the conversation we were having out in the hall before. We just reached a point with Tableau, and we can't union 2 Redshift instances in different locations. And Chris said, tell Tableau, make them fix it. So you have to hit that wall, and then you have to push the product, to that next level. Same thing, Amazon runs out of space with Oracle instances. We've reached the limit of what Oracle can do. So we've built our own database. So it's always going to go to the product team. Keep building. There's always going to be a new way.
We are living in a space where technology is moving and changing really rapidly, and we, the users, can have a lot of influence on which directions it moves.
You You could also just tell them to throw that piece of software away, and we'll buy you a new server that can access this thing with the money that we've saved doing other stuff. I mean, you could always do that too.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get one more.
So I hear a lot of job postings for BI architect. With the world going toward like self-service BI, do you see like where that job lands? Also, if there is a need for it, is it more of a business side or an IT side, or more of a combination role?
I got one of those today. I'll take this, and I think I'll tell you from the Tableau perspective, and then they can give you from the Power BI perspective. Because I think depending on your tool set and the way you approach data, it's gonna differ. I don't think the job's gonna go away, because none of this works without well-running services. Now, whether that's a report server or a database server or an ETL engine, none of this works unless those things work, right? And that's from an IT standpoint or a DBA standpoint, that you want them focused on building bigger, better, faster, more efficient services. But at the same time, you also, when you think about architecture, you think about not just how do we deliver the tool to the individual, how do we deliver updates, how do we deliver, the systems and the access and the controls, but how do we deliver the infrastructure that sits between them and the data? And, I work for a startup, we have 300 people. It's not that big of a problem. You work for anyone who works at Microsoft or works with Microsoft or at Amazon, and then you start covering time zones. Just the answer of how do I adjust time zones, right? It's a very simple question, but it's a very difficult thing to answer in a database. So thinking about where services are located, how are they architected, how do we manage latency, how do we manage security, how do we plug all these things in, so that not just that they run, but they run well enough so that we don't have to worry about them. And can be extended or swapped out for something bigger or better, faster or cheaper the next time around. Because like Tony said, the tools are going to change, but everyone's always going to have Postgres or MySQL or SQL Server or Hadoop or whatever. Those things will all exist. And the BI architect's job is to say, okay, we have a vision of services here and services in the middle and consumers on the side. How do we arrange them and protect them so that they work and are secure, and we don't tell we don't give away the farm?
Okay, so we're pretty much at our time limit. Do any of you have a single one-liner you want to close with?
Won't be one-liner, but about once a month, I teach a group of unemployed youth, and I don't really know who's going to show up for the class. They come from all different backgrounds, all different jobs. But the message I tell them is that it doesn't matter if you're an admin assistant or the CEO. I think in the future, every role is going to require a little bit more data savvy. So as long as you're moving in that direction, I don't think you can go wrong.
Any others? I'll just leave you with my favorite Yoda line, because everybody is trying to do self-service. My favorite Yoda line says, do or do not. There is no try.
All right, well, I want to thank the panel, so please join me. And thank you to Dave for mediating things. Yeah, thank you. There's another group of people I need to thank tonight. We don't write checks, but we volunteer our time. I don't know if I introduced myself at the beginning, but my name's Jeff Kirk, and there are several board members here with me tonight that have been orchestrating the event. First we have Derek and Tyler, and we have Ted in the back, and Harlan as well. Now we're missing a few. Ashmita is off having a baby tonight, and a couple of folks that are traveling. So thank you to the board.